That's I think the most ironic thing of the lot, that momentary pause I had at that door, that's exactly what I felt like, a few minutes before our world was essentially shattered, and probably 3 or 4 minutes before Madeleine was taken.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. In the previous episode, we looked at the narratives of Kate McCann and Goncalo Amaral, and we looked at how these two narratives approached the Smith sighting. And what we saw was that Martin Smith's name isn't mentioned at all in Kate McCann's book. Whereas the Smith family and the statement by the Smith family are kind of the focus. They're around about 2 chapters dedicated to the evidence of the Smith family in Amaral's book. In this episode, we're going to look at things a little bit differently. We're going to look at the media narrative. Now, I challenge you right now to enter the words Martin Smith, Madeleine McCann into Google and Google it and see if you can find stories about the Smith sighting in the media narrative. Now, what you're likely to find is some coverage of it in 2019, which is sort of covered by an Australian reporter, right? And then a little bit of that coverage was then recycled in the British tabloids like The Sun, and that was it, and maybe The Mirror. So you kind of had some focus on the Smith sighting last year, and then, as I say, a little bit of it was just sort of repeated briefly over there. Now, if you go and watch the Netflix documentary, a £20 million documentary, I think it's 8 episodes. I don't think the Smith sighting is ever mentioned once. I don't think it's referred to at all in the documentary. If I'm wrong, let me know. I just don't seem to recall it ever being mentioned. Obviously, a lot of attention is paid to the Tanner sighting, and the Tanner sighting is sort of built up. Talking about Jane Tanner, going to the sketch, the artist that did the sketch. And of course, the Tanner sighting is kind of quite absurd for quite a few reasons. One is there's no face of the man, and also you can't even see the child's face. So you kind of see a faceless man carrying kind of a faceless child, right? And even the orientation that the man was walking proved to be bogus. The whole thing was actually kind of a big joke. And yet, with and this is the crazy thing with the McCann case, the most reported missing person case in history, the most expensive missing person investigation in history, and then they spend 5 years looking for someone who's been doing star jumps, saying, "I think the guy you're looking for is me. Hello, it's me," but they carry on looking for him, right? You've got to sort of ask, was the urgency in looking for the abductor genuine, or was it pretend urgency? Was it, oh, yes, we're investigating and we this is who we think it is, or is it not true? Is it a pretend investigation with a pretend witness, with a pretend lead, right? Because one of the things that's extraordinary about the McCann case is the public relations. The sheer number, and you can see it in the Netflix documentary, the sheer number of spokespeople. It's just like a revolving door, one after the other. And if the spokespeople aren't spokespeople, then the investigators are ultimately sound like spokesmen for the McCanns. And if the investigators aren't spokespeople, then you've got endless people in the media queuing up to say, to kind of sympathize with their cause, right? And then you have the Smith sighting, and as I say, you can Google it and you'll get a little bit of coverage on in 2019, right? And then there's sort of nothing until 2013. So you kind of have the 5-year anniversary where everyone has been going after the Tannerman sighting, and then suddenly the investigation reroutes itself, gets itself on track, and they kind of say, oh, we've made a mistake. We've actually discovered that there's another sighting with the Smith family, and that's later on in the evening. So now our time frame and our timeline is now shifting to half an hour later, whatever it is, 40 minutes later. And so after 5 years that happens. And so you also have, as I say, 5 years after this frenetic press coverage, which has already set the Tanner narrative in stone, you kind of have the Irish family coming forward. Oh, no, this is the credible sighting, right? And the crazy thing is, on the 10-year anniversary, you had a documentary, which I played a clip from in a previous episode, where the presenter, I think his surname is Bolton, briefly mentioned the Smith sighting and said Martin Smith actually changed his mind. You know, he thought he saw Gerry McCann, but then he realized he was mistaken, and he kind of retracted his statement. And then Martin Smith actually complained about this, and this was covered in an article by Gemma Doherty, I believe. As far as I know, even her article saying something about did the BBC bend the truth or something. That article, the original article, I think published on Vox, I'm not sure if it's still there. But the point is, Martin Smith, when he did get a little bit of coverage on the 10-year anniversary, it was to say that he didn't implicate Gerry McCann. And then he complained to say, no, he hasn't changed his statement, he hasn't retracted anything. And so what happened then? The BBC completely excised that clip. So in other words, instead of saying, let's take out the bit where he said he retracted his statement, they took out the whole thing. In other words, Martin Smith doesn't appear in the BBC documentary Madeleine McCann 10 Years On. It's just taken out completely. So either Martin Smith's mentioned in there to say that, well, he retracted his statement, or if you can't say that he retracted his statement, well, then he's completely taken out of the documentary, which then focuses only on the Tanner sighting, right? So yeah, you've got the Netflix documentary, no reference to the Smith sighting, and this came out in 2018, right? So it wasn't a case of that you didn't have the information or something like that. Then you have this 10-year anniversary documentary that gets the information wrong by mistake, by accident, or something else. Because the McCanns participated in that documentary. You know, they were interviewed by this guy Bolton, or if they weren't interviewed, Bolton certainly got access to some pretty useful footage from the McCanns, filmed, for example, by John Corner at the time. And one would think that the McCanns would only part with this footage if there's going to be some kind of documentary that's sympathetic or positive to whatever their story is. In other words, they're not going to participate in something that's accusing them or makes negative statements about them. And what's a more negative statement than a witness on the night saying, I thought I saw Gerry McCann carrying Madeleine, at the time, just before 10 o'clock at night. What's more negative and damning than that? So you can kind of see why, first of all, the McCanns wouldn't want something like that to be impinging on the PR. Bear also in mind, the PR, certainly closer to the time, earned them a fortune. And so as soon as the PR changed, when they were made suspects, suddenly they didn't earn a fortune anymore. So good PR equals fundraising, bad PR equals the fundraising dries up. Doesn't that make sense? So the fact is, there's nothing about the Smith family online. You've just got to look for it quite hard. And what is quite funny about it is there's a heck of a lot of discussion about it on blogs and on Reddit and on forums, but not in the mainstream narrative. Why not? Like, is it a conspiracy? That's what it feels like. It sort of feels like when you just Google around, it feels like, oh, this is a conspiracy, and that the Tanner Man thing, that seems quite legitimate because everyone's talking about it. That's the impression you get. Now, at this point, you've got to sort of ask yourself, what was the value in this PR shitstorm, this PR blitzkrieg? Was the value in it getting bumper-to-bumper press coverage that would then frighten the abductor into coming forward, or give the abductor no place to hide? What is the value in all this? And I think we can answer sort of 13 years later and say, well, Madeleine's still missing. If she was abducted, the abductor basically didn't give a shit about any of the coverage. He didn't pay any attention to it. He wasn't exposed. He wasn't threatened. It had absolutely no impact on him. On the other hand, you could say, if someone responsible for the PR was also responsible for what happened to Madeleine, you could also say, well, the PR is what they wanted. So that's all. The PR is also not going to change their approach unless there's negative PR. And this Smith sighting was negative PR from that perspective. Now, the other thing that I think you can say is, what if there were legitimate leads? What is this shitstorm, this blitzkrieg of press coverage going to do to someone who is aware that as soon as you put up your hand to say, hi, I've got some information, what's going to happen? You're going to have this incredible exposure, not just to yourself, but to your whole family. And with the Smith sighting, it was his whole family present. Not his whole family, but quite a few family members present. And do you now want your family exposed to the tabloids? Look at what happened to Robert Murat. And if anything, Robert Murat was like a cautionary tale. Get involved in this McCann maelstrom of media, and you are going to be taken to the cleaners. Your life's going to be wrecked. So do you really want to come forward, right? And that's the unspoken story about the McCann PR thing, is someone with a legitimate account gets drowned out either by accident, or again, you could say, well, wasn't that the point of the PR? Wasn't the point to drown it out? You say, no. We were trying to, anyone with information, please come forward. And so what happens is thousands of people do come forward, and the people who want to come forward, maybe they do come forward, but the information is lost in the maelstrom. And surely you don't need coverage every day and this anniversary. So surely you just put out a bulletin saying, can someone come forward? You don't need constant press about it, do you? But the fact is, the Smith family did seem intimidated by the media shitstorm. Who wouldn't be? And as a result, it appears the story just sort of disappeared. This very important lead just disappeared, and it disappeared to such an extent that even the official, in inverted commas, investigation kind of woke up 5 years later and said, oh, there was another witness, oh, maybe we should pay attention to that. That's the extent to which the PR sort of flushed away that particular evidence, to the extent that it just wasn't really considered. What's quite interesting with Martin Smith is, and I'm going to go to the two articles dealing with it. The one is an article, I think, and you've really got to search to get this coverage. It's not easy to find. You've got to search to get this kind of information. So a lot of it's on overseas websites, strangely enough, and as I say, on blogs. So the Sunday Times article, I think the Sunday Times was sued over this article, so I'm going to repeat what was stated in a copied draft of this Sunday Times article, put on a blog. I'm not saying what is in that blog is accurate. I'm simply saying that is the article that got the Sunday Times into trouble. Make of it what you will. So we're going to look at that article. Then we're also going to look at a obscure statement made by the Smith family to Australian publication, or they just repeated it. Now, what is quite interesting as a researcher is you try and find information, you Google it, you'll Google strategic terms, and then you see that the story is there. You see that some publication did cover it. When you click on the link, it's gone. It's been removed. And it tends to be all the most sensitive stuff, all the stuff dealing with DNA or paternity or this or that. All the most sensitive stuff is no longer online, and yet there's so much other stuff that's still online, like the Tanner sighting. Weird, isn't it? So I'm going to quote now from a news.com.au article. It is dated 2013, October 2013. So obviously 5 or 6 years went by after the Tanner sighting and everything. Basically when the whole McCann case was kind of already on the back burner, they were no longer seen as official suspects. I'm just saying there was the impression that they were no longer official suspects. And people had kind of just moved on, and it was like, who cares about this case? And then you had this other information filter through, and on news.com.au, as I say, in October, you had this information. The holiday maker who described the man police now want to trace over the disappearance of Madeleine McCann in 2007 has spoken out. And this is the description given of Martin Smith, that is a former executive with Unilever. He told the Mirror UK that his information, now considered vital, now being 2013. So it had taken around about 6 years for people to go, oh wow, sure, this is an important witness. Maybe we should look at this. So, wow, did all the media attention, did that just make a big mistake? All of that media attention, all of the let's search for Madeleine. Oh, but someone thought they saw Madeleine the night she disappeared. How did we miss that? With all the media attention. And so the question is, was it missed because of the media attention, or was it just a bad mistake? Anyway, the article goes on to say it was virtually ignored by police in Portugal as they chased a lead given to them by Gerry and Kate McCann's friend Jane Tanner. Now, what I love about this article is the lead by Martin Smith was virtually ignored by police in Portugal. So who made this fuck up? The Portuguese police, right? The Portuguese police are inept. They don't know what they're doing. They're the idiots. There's a saying in Afrikaans, die varke in die verhaal, which means the pig in the story. The Portuguese police are the idiots in the story. They're the ones that didn't follow the this particular lead. Until you go to Amaral's book, where he says, no, we actually took the Smith sighting seriously. We invited the Smith family to come to Portugal and talk to us. The Smith family engaged with the Portuguese police. Okay, so the Portuguese police did actually take the sighting seriously. Okay, so who didn't then? Hello? Who didn't take the Smith sighting seriously if Amaral, the lead detective, was kicked off, said that they did, and said that kind of at the time that he was kicked off, they were trying to get the Smith family to come to Portugal. So when they say virtually ignored by police, who are we talking about? Which police? Are we talking about British police in Portugal, or British police investigating in Portugal, or the Portuguese police that are, I don't know, captured by certain entities? I mean, who are we talking about here? Because it's not Amaral. So you kind of have this funny situation where apparently the police ignored this, but hello, we just looked at Kate McCann's book, where she virtually ignores the Smith sighting in her own book. But hold on, we can't make the claim that she does ignore it, because she does refer to them, just not by name. She just refers to them as the Irish family, but she doesn't ignore them. No. And she kind of conflates that sighting with the Tanner sighting, right? So isn't it the Portuguese fault that the Smith sighting was ignored? And then what's interesting is they say they chased a lead given to them by Gerry and Kate McCann's friend Jane Tanner. The lead wasn't given by Gerry and Kate McCann. It was given by Gerry and Kate McCann's friend, and they gave them this lead that was actually the wrong lead. And the friend did the friend make a mistake? And the same, I'm just quoting from the article. The article goes on to say, it looked as if they put 90% credence on the Jane Tanner sighting. Maybe that wrong-footed them, and they didn't take our sighting as seriously. And this is what Martin Smith said. He said, it looks like they put 90% credence in the Tanner sighting, and maybe that wrong-footed them. And it seems like Martin Smith is under the impression that it's the Portuguese police that did this. That's the impression he seems to have, which for me is a bit unfortunate. And what's also unfortunate is if he knew this, that they were putting 90% credence into the Jane Tanner sighting, why not object to that and say, hey, I also saw something throughout the narrative? Why not make an effort to get hold of the media and say, hey, or even the police, and keep knocking on the door and say, I think this really important case that everyone's constantly talking about, I think I've got something valuable to contribute to it. And he goes on to say, I was surprised it took 6 years to rule out the other sighting. This kind of thing makes me quite upset, because it sort of, one kind of gets the feeling, Mr. Smith, couldn't you have been less surprised and more proactive and done something? And you might say, well, maybe he did do something and he was just ignored or whatever. The other side is the whole thing of being wrong-footed, that the Jane Tanner sighting wrong-footed the investigation by accident. I mean, the irony again is that the man walking with the child wasn't walking away from the apartment. We've already established that. We've established that Dr. Totman was returning from the creche with his child, and his apartment was to the west of the McCann's apartment, which means at 9:15 or whenever Totman was returning, he had to be walking towards apartment 5A. But that's not going to work very well with an abduction. How can the abductor be carrying Madeleine towards her apartment? And that is to what extent the Tanner sighting is wrong-footing, not just the abductor, but also Totman. Totman wasn't walking left to right, he was walking right to left. And yet, a simple thing like this isn't brought to Jane Tanner's attention to say, you made this statement. What do you have to say about this, given the counter to it? Didn't you recognize the man because he was actually staying at the Ocean Club? Didn't you recognize him as someone playing tennis with you? In any event, Jane Tanner gets all the attention, and that is how the Smith sighting just sort of slips away. And to go on with this article, it refers to new Madeleine McCann e-fits of wanted man made in 2008. He met Scotland Yard detectives twice over the past 18 months to help them with the new probe. So in 2013, there's now a new probe. That's how long it's taken to kind of realize. And you sort of, again, you get this kind of sense that are the cops investigating the Madeleine McCann's disappearance Inspector Clouseau or Johnny English? I mean, how dumb have you got to be to make mistakes of this caliber? And to make them for so long? How dumb have you got to be? I mean, you're chasing a faceless man, an Eggman, as your number one witness. Your other witness says, yeah, no, I saw his face. I can tell you exactly what he looked like. No, but we're not going to pay attention to that. We want to pay attention to the faceless guy walking the wrong way, who's been doing star jumps, saying, me, it's me, it was me, hey, like Donkey in Shrek. Me, pick me, it's me, I'm the one that you're looking for, me. No. We're looking for Tanner Man. Who could it be? And then after 5 years, oh, is it you? Oh, okay. Okay, well, let's redo our investigation. And yet, even though there's this big fuck up, there's not like a big media thing about Mr. Smith. It just sort of comes and goes and doesn't make it into the Netflix documentary, doesn't make it into the 10-year anniversary. It just fizzles again. Kate McCann doesn't seem to update her book to say, oh, we actually need to focus on the Smith sighting. Mr. Smith, it's just not in there. So I will put a link in the description to this particular article in news.com.au. I don't know where the original article is. I presume it's in the UK Mirror. And he talks about the only thing in the investigation, the only new thing in the investigation is the elimination of Jane Tanner's sighting. Apart from that, from our point of view, everything else remains the same in relation to what we said to the police and the media at the time. We have nothing more to add. That's also quite sad. It's quite sad that he basically says, we said what we said, we maintain our view, and we've got nothing more to say. And so, obviously, in a situation where you've got one important witness who kind of says, we've said our thing and that should be enough, bye-bye. And then you have someone else kind of putting up this ongoing media shitstorm. It's the shitstorm that gets everyone's attention. And the guy who said, I made my statement, I'm not changing it, and then he goes away and you never hear from him again. Whose version do you think is going to win through? Which one do you think is going to see the light of day? And that's why I say, because of this kind of reluctance to engage with the media, because of this kind of reticence, someone can actually take advantage of that. And the question is, in the BBC documentary where someone said, oh yes, the Smiths saw somebody that they thought at the time it was Gerald McCann, but later on they said, no, maybe we made a mistake. Isn't a journalist like that relying on the cravenness, the cowardice, the reticence of the witness to go, oh, I'm not going to get involved, I'm not going to counter that? And what happened? It was countered, unless the journalist in question just made a mistake, maybe assumed because nothing had happened that the witness had changed his mind, or somebody told him that. And if somebody told him that, who told him that? Where did that impression come from? And would that journalist want to talk about that? Would he want to talk about this impression that he had, how he got the impression, or did he just not make absolutely sure, confirm his information? If you scroll through the rest of the article, I'm not going to go through it here, but what's really interesting is at the same time that this article comes out, where in this rare instance where Martin Smith is actually talking to the press, you kind of have this big cheerleading thing. You can almost imagine Kate and Gerry almost like these American cheerleaders, pom-poms and doing gymnastics and, doing sort of triple twirls on like a mat. and on the other side, you've kind of got this 63-year-old retired executive quietly saying, well, we're not changing our statement, and that's all we've got to say. And on the other side, you've got Kate and Gerry kind of doing gymnastics and cartwheels and everything. And what are they doing? Oh no, they're going to Germany, I think, and Holland, and they're starting their new appeal because they want to find their daughter, and they've attracted 1,000 calls and telephone calls and emails started coming in. Operation Grange is getting up to scratch. Detectives, moments after the appeal on the TV show yesterday, now police say one or all of the unidentified men may have been involved in her abduction, and it's attracted calls from across the UK and overseas. At least one of the men who was said to have spoken in German or Dutch, prompting police to suggest Kate and Gerry travel to both countries. So Kate and Gerry are traveling to these countries, and that's where the action is. Let's look there. Forget about Martin Smith. The action is all in Germany and Holland. And if you think I'm making light of this, I'm not. It is absurd. It is a circus. It is a joke, and I think certain people do find it incredibly funny, but it's at somebody's expense. It's at somebody's expense. And when something's at somebody's expense, somebody else benefits from it, don't they? So the article in the Sunday Times, which I don't think you'll easily find, I have found it. It's on an obscure blog called the ukdatabase.net, and then it says, it doesn't even quote the source, but it says, why did the McCanns suppress vital evidence? Now, I'm not saying that they did. I'm simply repeating what this particular blog has, I think, copied from the Sunday Times article, right? And I'm not going to read the whole article. I'm just going to read certain parts of it. But it's referring to the same thing. It's referring to the kind of breaking news, sort of 5 years later, of the Smith sighting, right? I just don't think it's reported very well or very clearly. And I think the writers of the Sunday Times thing missed the point. I don't think it's about the allegation of suppressing evidence. I think it's about something else. It's either about accidental misdirection, or what can one call it? The folly of all that PR distracting everybody from the vital evidence. That's what I would call it. I wouldn't call it suppressing evidence. I wouldn't do it like that. I would just call it distraction. And did the distraction cost the investigation? Did it cause damage to the investigation, to a very important witness? And the answer is yes, it did. And so it goes on to say the evidence was in fact taken from an intelligence report produced for Gerry and Kate McCann by a firm of former spies in 2008. Sounds very cloak and dagger. It refers to crucial efforts of a man seen carrying a child on the night of Madeleine's disappearance, which have only this month become public after he was identified as the prime suspect by Scotland Yard. So the Smithman sighting is the man carrying the child is now identified as the prime suspect by Scotland Yard. This is in around about 2013. This is when the article came out. When the detectives decided this was, I think, 2008, so about a year later. So although the prime suspect is identified, it's kept a secret. It's kind of kept a secret who the prime suspect is. And the article goes on to say a team of hand-picked former MI5 agents had been hired by the McCanns to chase a much-needed breakthrough. Now, I've seen something like this before. I remember when I covered the Oscar Pistorius trial, Oscar hired a crack team of investigators, and they filmed him. Shooting through a door and shouting and running on his stumps and everything. And so in other words, Oscar was investigating himself. He hired investigators, and then the footage disappeared, and then it came up in Australia. And if the court at the time had referred to that, if the court had just referred to that, Oscar's defense team could have declared a mistrial, a trial by jury, a trial by media, and he could have said, well, this has compromised me. This evidence that I investigated into myself, I don't know how it got out there, but you can't refer to it, even if it's damning towards me. And so the whole court case gets shut down, right? This is an instance where the most important, arguably, witness gets investigated by McCann investigators. That's the way I understand this article. You could argue and say, no, it was independently investigated. Okay, so if it was independently investigated, what happened to that information? So this is just my question. Jane Tanner, there's that whole narrative, and that narrative's in Kate McCann's book, and Amaral refers to it, and it's in the media. It's excessively in the media, right? And so why don't you have the same thing with the Smith sighting? Just a simple question. You've got the Smith sighting and the Tanner sighting. Why are they not treated like equals? In fact, why isn't the Smith sighting treated with more credibility? Because you've got more people seeing the same thing, and also they see the face of the man, and they see quite a lot more of the child than Jane Tanner saw. So why is there not a narrative behind the Smith sighting? And you say, no, it hasn't been suppressed. There just isn't a narrative behind it. Okay, so what is that then? What do you call that when a witness comes forward, but then nothing happens with that? And then there is this allegation that it was investigated by the McCanns, or handpicked MI5 agents hired by the McCanns. Is that not accurate? Like, is that just not accurate? And then because the impression I got from the lawsuit based on this article was that they didn't suppress anything, and the information that they said came out later didn't come out 5 years later. It came out 2 years later, or whatever it was. So that part may not be true, as in it wasn't suppressed, but did the information sort of come out at breakneck speed? I mean, if it was investigated, why did the EFITs come out at the same time that the Jane Tanner egg-faced man profile came out, the drawing? Just a simple question: the EFITs of the Smith sighting, did they come out at the same time that the Tanner man thing came out? And ironically, you had quite a few people seeing the same thing, and as a result, you don't have just one EFIT, you've got two. But weirdly enough, having two sketches of the same person is somehow more confusing than having an egg-faced man with no face in it. And so you can kind of put any face in it. But I just want to raise a little thought experiment. Now, imagine a situation where let's take the McCanns out of this thought experiment. So someone that is responsible for the PR, but not the McCann, somebody else, let's say they are involved in Madeleine's abduction, right? So let's say they are using the PR as a smokescreen for what actually happened to Madeleine. It's not the McCanns, it's not the Tapa 7, it's just someone we don't know, but it's someone involved in the PR, someone who's putting the PR strings. And this person has decided, okay, wow, the Smith sighting is very dangerous for me. What I need is for you to pay attention to another sighting that didn't happen or that isn't credible. I just need you to be distracted or misdirected so that you don't believe the thing that's going to get me into trouble. So I need to misdirect you away from the Smith sighting to the Tanner sighting, right? And then that's how it starts. You realize, wow, that was so successful. Everybody fell for it, right? Just by kind of manufacturing or contriving, even whether it was by mistake or happenstance or whatever, that's a really great way to take people's attention away from the Smith sighting. Let's do it again. And isn't that what's been happening for the last 12, 13 years? There's been an endless revolving door of, could it be this person? How about that one? Maybe it's this one. Maybe it's that one. And all of what that is, well, as long as you just don't pay attention to the Smith sighting. And the amazing thing is, that's exactly what's happened, is the media just don't ever pay attention to the Smith sighting. Because who does the Smith sighting point towards? Who does Martin Smith say he thought he saw? How dare we even think or suggest that? I mean, how dare we even raise that point? So I'm going to put a link to this particular article. I'm not going to read the whole thing out, but you can read it and laugh at it and pull out your hair. But one additional aspect I want to raise is it refers to 10 months after the 3-year-old had disappeared from the Portuguese resort. It talks about the McCanns were beginning to despair of the handling of the local police investigation. Around about the time they became suspects, I don't know. Anyway, it says they started relying on a new team, right? And then it says within months the relationship had soured, so I guess with the new team. And a report produced by the investigators was deemed hypercritical of the McCanns and their friends, and the authors were threatened with legal action if it was made public. So the way I understand this, it's still written in kind of very vague terms. People aren't named, but apparently some new team was brought on. Again, no names mentioned. And then that didn't go very well because the report they produced was critical of the McCanns and their friends, and then the people who wrote the report were threatened with legal action. If you make this public, we're going to sue you. We hired you to investigate, and now you're saying, now you're criticizing us. That can't work that way. And then it says its contents remained secret until Scotland Yard detectives conducted a fresh review. They found that it contained new evidence about a key suspect seen carrying a child from the McCann's holiday apartment. It wasn't new evidence. And the key suspect was key right in the beginning. It's not new evidence. It's the oldest evidence that there was. It was the evidence that there was right in the beginning. This sighting is now considered the main lead in the investigation and efforts of the suspect. What a fucking joke. So I see further down the team security firm are mentioned and so on. I'm not gonna refer to them by name. You can read about that if you like. Again, make of this article what you will. There's a reason it's not available on the mainstream page. There's a reason it's hard to find. You can also read an article from the same time, October 2013, from the Daily Mail. I'm just going to quote a very short section from there. It goes like this. At a spot a 6-minute walk from the McCann's holiday accommodation, they saw a man carrying a blonde child aged around 4, they being the Smith family. It was just before 10 p.m. and the street lighting was poor. Although Mr. Smith admitted he was not wearing his glasses at the time, he later said he thought the man could have been Gerry McCann. So here we have this wonderful hedging and compromising of the witness statement. First of all, it was the street lighting was bad, and second of all, the witness admitted he wasn't wearing glasses. And the other thing that I love about this article is it says, it immediately after mentioning Gerry McCann, it says, this is an impossibility as dozens of witnesses confirmed he was at the holiday complex at 10 p.m. British police have also said they are certain that Mr. McCann has nothing to do with his daughter's disappearance. So you've got Mr. Smith saying, I thought I saw Gerry McCann in this poor light without my glasses on. And then everyone else says, well, that's impossible because everybody says, dozens of witnesses said he was at the tapas bar at 10. But there's a little bit of a discrepancy here, and the discrepancy is that the Martin Smith said it was just before 10. He's saying that the time that he saw this wasn't at 10. It was at a time that he's not 100% sure of, but it was before 10. And the witnesses are saying, well, that's impossible. We saw Gerry at 10. And who are these witnesses? Like, I don't know if it's true to say dozens. It might be half a dozen witnesses. I don't know. I don't know who sourced this article, but who are these dozens of witnesses? Are they almost certainly they're the tapas group? But here's your problem with the investigation is the Smith sighting says who they thought they saw, and then there's a group of witnesses that say no, that's impossible. He was right here with us. And this is an assumption, but I would assume that one of the people in that group who could vouch for where Gerry was Jane Tanner. Jane Tanner would say, well, I saw Gerry in the street talking to Jez. I saw Gerry in the restaurant. I saw someone else abducting Madeleine. And then it turned out what Jane said wasn't 100% accurate. It wasn't 100% actionable. So if you can start to strike Jane Tanner's testimony as not completely reliable, maybe she's been completely honest. Maybe she thought she saw what she saw. But nevertheless, it wasn't very helpful. What about her seeing Gerry McCann talking to Jez? Was it Gerry? Maybe it was someone else. Was she wearing glasses, and wasn't the street lighting poor? Because, I mean, she wasn't able to tell who Dr. Totman was and which way he was walking. So maybe Jane Tanner made an error. And so what's great again about this Daily Mail article is it sort of mentions the Smith sighting, but then at the same time debunks it. You know, like, wow, here's an important sighting, but it's actually irrelevant. And that is how it gets struck from the whole narrative. It talks about this led to Mr. Smith's account being called into question. He's referred to as a retired businessman from County Louth, Ireland, staying in Praia de Luge, at the time 65 years old. And what about the children that didn't have the need to wear glasses, or other people that were with him? What did they see? And that's going to be the subject of the next episode, which is really just dealing with what statement Martin Smith made, when he made it, and then his follow-up statement. So if you're interested in following that, please subscribe to the channel, like, share, leave a comment, and I'll see you guys next time.